Here's a message from friends of the show.
What if I told you there is a world where not only are monsters like vampires and werewolves real, but they have rights, just like you and me. And in this world, there exists a secret government organization dedicated to keeping you safe and making sure they follow the rules. Welcome to Anarium, a Monster of the Week podcast. Each episode, you will follow the story of 3 agents of Anarium, played by Rob Hamilton, Taylor Catron, and Cameron Baker, as they navigate through the treacherous world that Game Master Samuel Herbert has imagined for them. Tune in on Spotify, iTunes, or whatever your preferred podcast platform is. It's dangerous out there, folks, so remember, leave the monster hunting to us, the professionals.
Welcome back to Tabletop Journeys. We are really excited for tonight's episode. This is an episode that has been a few weeks in the making here. Really excited to introduce you to tonight's guest. Before we get into that, Mr. Myers, Mr. Miller, good evening. How are things where you are tonight?
Things are great. It's been a busy weekend, seriously busy weekend. A lot of gaming.
Like we had a Kickstarter that just started on Thursday.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Kickstarter on Thursday, gaming on Saturday with our actual play crew. Fantastic adventures, awesome. And of course, I did gaming with some other folks also on Monday, my home game. So real busy with it and just generally just enjoying life. It's been a great week.
Yeah. How about you, Glenn? How are things going? So I know you're still in Connecticut at this point, and you said probably in Connecticut until we take off for the Midwest to go to a Catacon in November.
I'm actually coming back for November, and then I'll leave again.
And I'm coming back too.
But yeah, I'll be a New Englander for a little while longer. Yep. Yeah, it's where we got a lot of family and everybody, and you guys. It's been a similarly busy weekend. I was in that Patreon game on Saturday. Our Kickstarters kept us watching the numbers with bated breath and wondering will we fund and how quickly will we fund and yada yada yada. Yeah. So it's just been doing.
The Kickstarter doing very well, obviously. So we are on day 5 at this point. We're about 2/3 of the way funded, and which is great. We're really solid weekend, really solid first week. Hopeful that we'll be able to go ahead and keep this momentum moving forward. And I think that probably by the next time that we get together to record, I think that we will have good news that we have hit our goal and start talking about our stretch goals and getting everything together. I don't want to jinx it just yet, but I'm optimistic. I think we're in a good place. Everyone out there that's been thinking about backing, now is the time. While you're listening to the episode here, you can go check out the Traveler's Guide to Factions and get your money on.
Back it now. I can't take the stress.
Exactly. Glenn's very stressed about this. I'm very zen about it this time. I know the last time we did a Kickstarter, I was like eating my shoes, man. I was like,
I'm actually doing okay. That was just for fun.
Yeah. So anyway, let's get on to the serious meat of our conversation this evening. Yes. So we've got a really special guest tonight. We've got Griff Morgan on here from the production crew of Secrets of Blackmoor. And if you're not sure what Secrets of Blackmoor is, first of all, let's introduce our guest. Griff, welcome to Tabletop Journeys. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So for folks that don't know what Secrets of Blackmoor is, what's the Dime Tour? What can you tell us about what Secrets of Blackmoor is?
It's a movie about a bunch of like high school and college kids that get together and they start playing war games, and then they're looking for other things to do in their war games. They want it to feel more realistic, and so they start to introduce the fog of war, which is just the element of uncertainty. And in doing so, they end up inventing Dungeons and Dragons, effectively. They're the Blackmoor bunch. They're the guys that were playing fantasy role-playing games before D&D was created. And then one of them, their main dungeon master, Dave Arneson, worked with Gary Gygax, and they produced the original Dungeons and Dragons. And so the movie is just the story of how they go from A to B with a lot of stops in between to get to the creation of an actual fantasy role-playing game.
It's tremendously interesting. So it's available on Amazon Prime. You can watch it on Amazon Prime. A little bit over 2-hour runtime, and really fascinating, good stuff. I'm really glad that we're going to have the opportunity to ask some of the questions about some of the things that came up as we were watching, because as lovers of film and of documentary and of Dungeons and Dragons in particular, man, this movie scratched a lot of itches for me. So that's really cool. Yeah.
I wanted to add, it's also available worldwide. It's available on Vimeo. For some reason, Amazon won't let us put it on their services in other countries. So say if you're in Australia, you have to use Vimeo, but you can rent it on there as well.
Okay. That's interesting.
It's the film business. It's weird what they distribute things in weird ways.
Yeah. Streaming does not make sense to those who are not part of that industry in any way, shape, or form.
Hey, I'm in the industry, and it doesn't make sense to me.
And there you go, right?
Yeah, right. Even if you're in it, they slap you around a little bit. So yeah, I can answer anything you'd like to know. I'd like to can I just do a quick plug for the convention?
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so we got to know all the people that were involved in the Blackmoor bunch through doing the movie. And so for years now, we've been wanting to do a game convention, and we were about to do one. We wanted to do one, and then this thing came along called COVID, so we couldn't do one. And then last year, we didn't really have the funds to do it. So this year, we're launching what is officially the first Arnicon convention, which will feature all the Blackmoor players that are in the area that can come to the convention. And it's happening in the Twin Cities, and you can find out about it on our website, TFOTT.com, which stands for the Fellowship of the Thing.com.
The Thing. I love it.
Yeah, we're silly. You can look at it. There's a page there for Arnicon, and you can get badges and find out more information there. And it's coming this October.
Before we get into our question, I want to talk on the silliness thing for just a second, because that was one thing that struck me about the movies. This is more of a statement and less of a question. Sometimes we find that, and we're certainly guilty of this too, is that we take ourselves very seriously when we're running games and playing games. Man, that group was just silly. Like, they just enjoyed the fun of it an awful lot. And so that was really cool. A lot of them did.
Some of them were a little bit too serious, and they fell by the wayside, I think. I think the people that were too rigid just fell away.
Yeah, interesting.
I think that's a charisma thing if you want to get into the nuts and bolts of a role-playing game, which is the characters who are charisma become the faces of the party. They become the faces of the game, or the ambassadors of the game. So the ones you and your team kept going back to really rose to the top as far as, man, that's somebody I want to sit down and game with. Or in some cases, there are a few of the folks there, I want to sit down and game with them, but also because at some point you just sit down at the foot of the master to watch how they do a thing, because there's still all these years later, and I've been gaming and running games for many years, not as long as that crew, but for quite a few years. Right. And I can tell you that there are still some things that were talked about in the film, and some little nuggets of intuition that came through in that film that made me go, I need to start considering how I put that into my games. Like little nuggets that I had at different points in my role-playing career that somehow I've forgotten about that. Man, I forgot how powerful that little thing it could be. And it's time to bring that back. And that's what I really liked about it. It was just really that way to get back to the core of what I originally fell in love with role-playing games, and how to bring that back into what I'm doing now.
Yeah. Like, I bought a copy of Strategos after watching the movie. I was like, I need to read this book. I need to see what's
I'm planning on it. I just haven't done it yet.
The original Strategos?
You have it.
Yeah, you can find hard copies on Amazon, like in the resale market on Amazon. Yeah. So, it wasn't hard. It was like $30-$40. Yeah. It wasn't that expensive. So,
it wasn't an original printing.
It must probably not an original. It must have been a reprinting. Yeah. So it's not the original 1880s. Yeah. Probably a little bit. So. Yeah.
No, I wanted to get back to what Lewanika was saying about it, because I feel the same way. I was involved in making the movie, but when we did those interviews, every time I was just coming back and, oh, wow, I need to think about this. Or else they would just remind me, like, I used to do that 20 years ago. Why don't I do that anymore? And I just kept getting all these ideas on how to run my own game. And I don't think I'm an expert at it. I have my good days and my bad days.
We all do.
As do we all.
Yeah. My last session, I just felt like I wasn't on it. And I was even apologizing to my game group. I was just like, I'm sorry, guys. I'm really tired tonight. I'm not on my game. But I don't know. Just talking to them, you learn so much. I can't name any specifics because there's so many, but I agree. I think there's a lot.
That's the thing, and that's why I love about the fact that I've got it and the ability to rewatch it, because there was so much, and I took notes while watching it, and I'm like, okay, at a certain point, I'm like, I just want to enjoy this film. So my notes were timestamps that I could go back and rewatch
Right.
timestamps. Because if I watch this to take notes, beyond what I need to have a good interview and a great conversation with you about the film, I'm not going to enjoy the film as much. And it was probably 15, 20 minutes in that I said, screw that, I want to enjoy this film. And I stopped,
Right.
brought the film back to the beginning and just started watching the film and just watch the film, would mark down some timestamps to go back to so I can get more specific notes to help my gameplay. I'm big on documentaries anyway. That's my style. I love, as much as I love fiction, I'm actually probably more of a nonfiction reader. And so documentaries really scratch that itch for me, and especially when it's about my own personal passions or topics that I'm very interested in, and this is both. So I'm just enjoying learning about the origins of this game, and it just reminds me of a very important adage that's like a family ethos with my family, which is you have to know where you come from to know where you're going.
Right.
And that's what I really love about this. This really just matches up with my personal values in that way, is knowing where all of these things that we are doing today come from. And
It was
back
fantastic
to
getting that story like that. It was almost like Roots for gamers. It was literally like the story of how it all started. I'm sorry, Lewanika. I felt impassioned enough. I had to burst in there. And I love that you were talking about family and the documentary part, because Nate also really vibes on the documentaries and the truth over fiction. Nate's my youngest son. He's 19.
Okay.
He wound up coming by while I was watching it and stopping to watch over my shoulder. And he was there for probably 15 or 20 minutes.
Was he
and he finally
geeking out a little bit?
A little bit, yeah. And he's, what are you watching? Because he plays the war games too. He doesn't just role play. He likes to pull out minifigs and set up the battle games and things like that too. And I told him, and he's, oh wow! And he's now planning to watch it because he didn't. He was playing a game with his friend inside. But it was really neat to have him come by and get sucked into it too.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
It is definitely that kind of movie that if somebody's watching it and they're walking past, and you see them come back 2-3 times, and the popcorn was already gotten the first time, you know why they're there. And that's where you just sit down and watch the movie. You need to rewind a little bit, just sit down and watch the movie. You'll be all right. You'll be all right.
All right, gentlemen, I think we are up to the question and answer portion of tonight's show. So I'm going to break out my fan roll dice, get initiative rolled here, and see who gets to ask first. So
use it like an honesty system where everybody gets their own initiative die roll and you declare it.
Not yet, no, but I'll tell you what, if I don't at least come up first or second, I'm going to have to buy another set of fan roll dice. That's just
exactly. Yeah.
So I'm rolling digital dice, and I rolled 20.
Oh, okay. I'm at 6, Lewanika, so I'm not sure how you did there.
I came up at 12.
Okay, so it'd be Glen, Lewanika, and then myself. All right, Mr. Myers, you get to start us off on round 1. How about
Take it away.
On round 1, with the lead-off initiative, I got to go with the most basic introductory kind of softball-y question that I've got, which is the Secrets of Blackmoor literally is the history of where D&D came from. Regardless of how anybody feels about things after the split, that it's irrefutable. That's where it all started. And I love that this movie got made because it brought that story to me, and I was never aware of it. I've been playing D&D since Advanced Dungeons and Dragons came out. My dad was my first DM. I was 8, so it was like 79 or 80.
79, probably, yeah.
I've been doing this a really long time, and I had no idea that there was anybody before Gygax or alongside him, and because of the way that things have gone. So my question is, because one of the things that was in my mind the most was, how did this movie come to pass? What's the story behind the story? Who drove for it to be produced? What was the force that carried the momentum forward to get it done?
It's a stupid story, really. It's like Chris and I would get together. We get together. We still get together every Monday night at our favorite hangout, and we sip scotch and we smoke and we just talk about crap. And we had been working on some movie stuff, and we were working on. I had designed this social media system that we were trying to develop, and that's where the company name comes from. The Fellowship of the Thing was actually the company that was trying to do the social media platform. And I started playing with Chris's brother's group and an old friend from, believe it or not, I think junior high school, the guy I knew from junior high school. And I joined their group and I was playing with their group. And I got to make this as short as possible because it can go all over the place. But
we love rambling stories. Don't stress it.
No.
Yeah, so I got on the internet. I got back. We were playing Pathfinder, and I didn't really like the rules for Pathfinder, or I liked the rules, and I thought the die roll system was really elegant, the third edition type, the D20 type thing, and I thought that was cool. But something about it, maybe too many rules for me, and so I started thinking about my original Dungeons and Dragons rules, and I got those out. And I went on Facebook and I found a group that was dedicated to original Dungeons and Dragons. And maybe a week after I joined the group, it came up. Everybody was like raving about Gary Gygax. And I guess it was Gary Gygax's birthday. And so I just typed in, not realizing that there was any sort of drama around that. The drama happened in the 70s and we're in the teens, 20 teens. So I type in, what about Dave Arneson? I had no idea this was going to create, I watch my language, but a crap storm. And before long, people were just yelling at me. And there were people in there that were like game authors that I knew that had worked at TSR, and they were calling me an idiot and other much worse things. A lot of dirty words. And this guy named Kevin McCall, I didn't know his name at the time. I just started getting messages from this anonymous person. And they were like, oh, no, you're right, here. And they would give me these links to things like, here's an article on Dave Arneson, here's another article. And so I thought that was interesting. And I would just repost the links he gave me to the argument. And I was like, why don't you get in there and say something? So, oh, no, they all know me. If I go in there, they're going to turn me a new one. You got to do it for me. And I don't know, it seems like it lasted at least 3 days. It might have been just 2 days, but I got a little paranoid. Who's this guy that I don't know on the internet that's using me as like his little sock puppet proxy to wage war on all these other people? Yeah. And half of the D&D universe seems to hate me on here. People are coming in just to watch the old TSR employees trash me. It's a spectator sport at this point. And finally, I asked the guy what his name was, and Kevin was like, oh, my name's Kevin McCall. I used to be Dave Arneson's webmaster. And so I started talking to Kevin. Long story short, we just started talking about making a movie, and then Chris and I actually made other movies, and both of us have a long history of working in film and video. And so I would just go out on Monday nights and tell Chris about all this stuff I was learning about D and history and all this stuff. And one night he was like, Griff, we should just go out there and shoot some interviews and just see what happens. And so that's how it happened. We started. And once we started, it was just so interesting. We kept working at it. And it took 6.5 years or so to make the movie. That's the story in a nutshell for you.
Wow. Okay.
6.5 years. Wow.
That is a labor of love. Oh my goodness.
And suffering.
Yeah, I'm sure there was plenty of suffering. Yeah. Thank you so much for going through it though, because it is a wonderful historical documentary about the origins of our hobby. I'm a better steward of the game for having seen it, I feel.
I absolutely agree with that statement. And what I find interesting is, for all of our gaming, and part of that is our age. So obviously we got into gaming roughly 10 years after the controversies flared up and happened, and there was no internet. So in our little weird pocket of southeastern Connecticut, at our one single game store, there might have been a magazine article about it, but anything that you were getting from TSR, which was largely the only game in town, if you weren't wargaming specifically, that only had one side of the story. So at some point, because I am much more, like I said, a nonfiction reader than a fiction reader, I was aware that there were other people involved in the creation of the game. I was aware that there's a bit of a history, and I was certainly aware that there were legal wranglings as well as social wranglings in that process. But what the story was, how much vitriol was involved, something totally didn't understand or know about whatsoever. Your story here, what we saw in the film to some extent, though largely stayed away from the controversy end of it, beyond just saying, here's this part of the tale. It wasn't even here's our side or this side as much as here's this part of the tale. right? And put it in context with other things. Hopefully,
because it doesn't try to say anybody else is wrong. It just talks about facts.
Yeah, here's what happened. Here's the account of what happened in this basement at this game table at this time. Here's what happened in this other basement at this game table. Here's what happened at this kitchen table at this time. And interviews with the people who were there. So I love the fact that it matches up with the pieces of the history that I have known or come to know, but at the same time allows me to put everything into context. And I have my thoughts on the context. I'll save that for the end of our interview, but I really feel strongly that it is important to understand that when people are involved in a thing and people split, it's about getting all the pieces and parts and then let other people make the decisions. And certainly we hope that people can do things better than what took place here. But at the end of the day, everybody has their own story to tell. And I love the fact that you were able to reach out and tell Dave Arneson's story, because that's something that has been largely hidden from all of us. In all that preamble, there was actually a question I was going to ask. And
I got to go now. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. I burned up
that's our show. All right.
And that's our show. Excellent. Yeah. See y'all. But it was not lost on me when watching this that the desire of the folks playing the game and Dave playing the game was to make wargaming more realistic. That's what the evolution of role-playing games came from. And it just strikes me as odd that we are now in 2023 at a point in time was whenever you try to introduce a new rule or a new mechanism that adds some realism to the game, the most frequent argument is, well, we're not a reality simulator. That's not what we're going for. And I'm like, and then it dawned on me, but that's why we're here. Like, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for an effort to be somewhat of a reality simulator. While the game definitely steered towards fantastical elements, the goal seems to me, certainly from watching this movie, was always to add realism to those fantastic elements. So you may be fighting a fantastic creature that doesn't exist in reality, but other than the things that break that reality, all other things should function in reality. And I love that aspect of it. I was wondering if in your specific interviews, because I think that definitely came across, but if there's anything that may not have made the film or any specific insights you may have had from your interviewees that where they might have commented on some of those trends in the modern game versus what they set out to do back in the 60s and early 70s.
Most of them are not. It's funny because they were there when D&D, they're the ground zero for the development team for D&D. They developed the concept with Dave Arneson, and then Arneson takes it to Gygax. And so most of them aren't even role players anymore, and so they don't have I'm not aware of many of them actually playing role-playing games anymore, and if they did, they would probably be using really old rules, because most of them own original sets, like brown boxes. I saw more brown box D&D sets than I knew even existed when we were making the movie. And then if you talk to them, Wesley runs a game night at his house, and a bunch of the guys from the old crowd come to that. And the guys that come to that are like, yeah, we don't want to play any more RPGs. We want to sit down and do some serious wargaming. So they're all really, they've done a full circle. And they went from wargaming all the way into imaginary land. And then they're back to wargaming. I'm the same way. I actually would prefer to just play a big miniatures wargame, but include a lot of the role play elements of hidden movement and secret orders, and maybe like you're given a role and you're this lieutenant, and by the way, you have a grudge against your commander because he did something to screw you over, and if you go into battle, you would be pleased if his unit was eliminated and he was killed because he's just a jerk. And that's the sort of stuff where you start addressing the role playing, maybe, is in that kind of storyline that you can create in a war game. We did so much interviewing. The movie's 2 hours and 14 minutes with the credits and everything, roughly. And I haven't added it up, but I suspect we might have about 200 hours of footage. Okay.
Oh, wow.
And there's a lot of it that just everybody's repeating what everybody else said. And it's not like really exciting stuff. You'd want to drill down into the really good stuff. There were little things like Ross Maker in one of his interviews. I was saving a lot of stuff because we wanted to do another movie, but our sales didn't really allow us to fund another movie. And Ross Maker talked about things that I had never considered. When Dave Arneson was running his game, the first one that would get killed during a session would then be in charge of running the monsters for Dave Arneson. And so it was competitive in a way. And then the other thing, yeah, I get to be all the monsters and I get to try to kill your characters. Like, this is not easy. You're not going to get off easy. This is really, it's just a really challenging sort of experience. And then I'm trying to think of the other things that were interesting that, it just slipped my mind. Ah, dang it. Anyway, they did a lot of different things that I was really surprised by. And the thing that is with them is that they didn't have any rules. So it was like, what do you want to do when Dwayne Jenkins is, I want to be a vampire? So it's supposed to be fantasy, Tolkien fantasy land, but then you got a guy that wants to be like a gothic horror vampire. I don't know. They're an interesting group.
Yeah, I love that depiction of how things came together and them rolling back to wargaming.
Yeah.
It reminds me of a lot of my early time when I first moved to Maine and I started playing in what our group calls the Alanis campaign, which started in 2nd edition, played through 3rd edition, and is currently being played in 5th edition.
Oh, so this is one of the really old ones.
Yeah, this is a legacy campaign, and we've gone generations by generations. And so much of what I saw in that movie and so much what you described was a part of these campaigns in that early campaign world. So when I joined, there was an all call at the local game shop, and like 40 people showed up at the second week. And my GM had no idea what to do, so he basically sat us like 8 to 12 at a table. There were a bunch of tables upstairs, a couple tables downstairs in the basement of the game shop. It's called Full Moon Games, and run by another friend. And he basically had the rules he set up were, if your character dies, you're out. We'll put you on a list to rejoin the game. And he basically just played the game, and he set it up so players worked at their own tables. He would go table by table. He'd leave you with the mission. You'd figure out a strategy. He'd bring in figs for big battles or even minor skirmishes, and then table by table. And you were all basically a squad in this larger army fighting a revolution. You're basically revolting against the big power. So it's very much that you're playing a role in a war game scenario.
It's kind of like a Brownstein almost.
Yeah, very similar. That's when I was watching and hearing about Brownstein, I'm like, man, that concept was really cool. This is exactly what Ben was doing. And it was like, you gave orders or whatever. The other thing he did is he seated in secret notes. I remember he told myself and 2 other players, we know for a fact somebody in this overall group is a spy for the enemy. So when I knew it wasn't the 2 people, the 2 other people that were told, and I knew it wasn't me, I said, you 2 go do all the important missions, leave the rest of them with me. And I basically would take one of those tables out on a suicide mission and against some bad guy. And if the bad guy actually killed them, I feel bad because obviously they weren't working for the bad guys.
Right, but and the one who lived was the one.
But if somebody got off easy, they were clearly the spy. And I went out and literally rolled through table by table, running groups through these various gauntlets to ferret out the spy.
Did you figure it out?
I did eventually. It did actually cost an entire village most of their lives. It actually cost about 40 other players their lives. It was a mess, but we got the spy.
Yeah.
And then I set him up so he got killed by his own people anyway, and nobody knew I was the one that was orchestrating this part of it because I was actually playing a rogue.
That's great.
Well, and so I was going to say that, or those early Alanis, because that's actually where Lewanika and I didn't meet there, but that was one of the things that we did very early in our friendship was play in this campaign. And I remember so much of this movie kind of rang true for the early days of that campaign because it's like the whole aspect of if you're dead, now you're running the bad guys. That was definitely something that Benito did when we were early on in the game because he's like, when you got 12 people, you just need them there, right? And then the other thing is just the ever encroaching armies of bad guys that he would keep putting on the table, hundreds and thousands of figs that, like, if you're fighting in like a necromantic army or whatever like that, like the skeletons that just kept coming. It's like, how could he possibly have this many figs? What is he doing? And it's not repeating, all hand painted, all everything. And so a lot of those elements really rang true to some of my very earliest really good gaming. That was very nostalgic for me in the movie.
I was going to say, I like hearing about the old campaigns, because there's one thing that's been introduced. I'm not sure what edition it came out in. It might have been 3rd edition. They started to market the idea of a campaign as like the duration of a module. And older gamers who started with AD&D or 2nd edition or whatever, it's the campaign is the world. It does not end. If the campaign ends, the world ends, and we got to start all over from the beginning. And I'm like, I don't know how hard it was in your games, but the highest level character I ever had was an elf that was like a 4th level magic user, 5th level fighter when I got to be a player. And it took me years to get there because the carnage was so ever present in the earlier editions.
I had a scant few that got very high level, but it took years. I'm talking characters I played from 86 into the 90s before they got into the high teens or whatever. And that's back when you could go to the 30s and so on and so forth. Unless you're playing the Monty Hall campaign that they used to play. But that wasn't our style. Our style was, like you said, it was very close to that Bromstein style. It was very close to the, here's your role in this greater conflict, and what are you doing? Who are the forces you're marshaling? I lament with great fervor the loss of the minion rules and the follower rules of 1st and 2nd edition, and even loved the version that they had in 3rd edition. I thought those were really good as well. I lament that doesn't exist in 5th edition, and at some point we'll introduce it. If the official companies won't do it, I happen to work with a group of folks that will do it, because dang it, I love it.
Or you can just plug it in from an earlier edition and just go like, we're going to do this because we know we can do it.
Yeah, because I think there's something to be said for building something within your game. You build up your squad builds up, your platoon builds up, your company builds up, your battalion, and so on and so forth. I love that aspect of gaming. And one of the hardest things for me to do when I go to my local game store to run a tabletop game, whatever the genre might be, is when the war gamers are also there, because part of me is always taking breaks to go over and look at their figs and see their in battle, their placements, and just marvel at their command of how to build terrain. And sometimes, like, if they're building something on a site that I've actually been to, and to see it depicted so accurately is amazing to me. And I don't war game often. I have at times, but I just marvel at it. I just marvel at it and love that element of it, and love the fact that this film really brought out that part of me and reminded me how great that is.
So I get to ask a question now. Finally.
Yeah.
It's like,
let's go back to the beginning again. We're going to skip.
Well, and that's actually exactly what I want to do a little bit here, Griff. And I want to learn more about how you got into this, and how, you talked about how you knew about Dave Arneson's story when you joined the Facebook group and everything like that. But what kind of brought you there? How did you get into role playing? What's your role playing genesis?
I've told this on a lot of shows. Excuse me. I'm a nerd. So if you look at the movie, the plastic figures of knights and stuff that are in the beginning, those are my toy soldiers from when I was a kid, from about 1974 or 5 or so. So I didn't know that, or maybe even earlier. It might have been more like 71. But I had my knights. I used to have Airfix, 1/72nd scale Airfix toy soldiers when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. And I would build plastic tank models, and I would do things like I had a big piece of carpet remnant as my rug in my bedroom, and so I would slide books under it to make hills, and I'd get out all my little army men and build these giant battles. It'd take me hours. I'd be setting up hundreds of little soldiers, and then I'd run around and knock them over and do my battles. I was primed for all of that. And then I read The Lord of the Rings when I was about 12. And then what else? Yeah, so I happened to live in a city where they had a mainframe computer known as Plato, and it was an educational computer system. And so my friend took me down there and introduced me to that, and I got a sign-on, which was pretty unique for the 70s. It might have been 75 or 76. I'd never seen a computer before then. And they had a game on there called Letter D, Letter N, Letter D. And so I didn't even know it stood for Dungeons and Dragons. It was just D&D is what I called it. And it was a mix between David McGarry's dungeon board game, and because it's like a top-down view with a map, and you just see the area around you. And when you move, things kind of keep sliding around you, and you're like just stuck in the center. And just random encounters. It's really primitive. You can look it up. If you look up Plato computer D&D on YouTube, there's a demo that you can watch. So I played that, and then I've discovered another game called Empire, which was a Star Trek-based 4-team multiplayer top-down view combat game, like Risk mixed with a first-person, or not really a first-person shooter because it's top-down, but a team Risk game where you're running around trying to take over planets. It's really cool. And so I did that, and then my family moved away from that town in 77. So a year or two later, I moved away, and I didn't have access to that. And I discovered in a hobby store that there were these other games, and there was like somebody had been really clever, and they took the computer game that I had been playing, and they released it as Dungeons and Dragons as a paper and pencil game.
They were so smart.
Yeah, they were so smart. I had I was convinced, like, wow, they took the computer game and they made it a paper game, because I didn't know that it was the other way around. And then it registered a couple months later. It's really hard to deal with reality shifts like that when you get something in your head a certain way, and somebody presents you with like real evidence to the contrary. It's still really hard to change your mind. So that's how I got into playing D&D, and then I had my little group that met at the library, and starting in 77. And then I got into another group because they were really stuck on D, and I wanted to do other things. And then AD&D came out, and I don't know, there was like, everybody was trying to rule-splain me because now they had these fixed rules, and everybody wanted you to play it by the rules. And I was like, I've been playing D&D as a DM for years, and I run my own world and it just didn't fit for me. So we started doing other things. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And then I played war games. That era, you were exposed to a lot of war game stuff through even the Dragon magazine would have articles on war games. So like I remember like when System 7 Napoleonics came out, it was like a system that used little cardboard counters instead of miniatures, and you could play Napoleonics on a coffee table. I had to get that, and I got it, but I could never find anybody to play it with me. So I was like a D&D, an RPG kid that really wanted to be a wargamer, but I could never find wargamers to play wargames with me. So I would just buy all the wargames and read the rules and study them. and miniatures too. I had armies of medieval soldiers and stuff. What I would add is I still play those computer games because they're being emulated on the server. The mainframe is being emulated on a server. And so you can access all the old Plato games on this place called cyber1.org.
Nice.
And I play Empire every Sunday night because it was like, it's just such an amazing game. I just want to keep playing it. And so a bunch of us old dudes bash it out every Sunday night.
I wonder what the relation between that game, because there's a game that I used to play called Space Empires that was very similar. I would have described it like Risk plus Star Trek, right? Where it's like you're jumping from planet to planet, and there are like alien factions that are like moving in and trying to take their own territory. And it was like single player though; it wasn't multiplayer.
Right? So it might be like a derivative. The closest thing would be NetTrek, and NetTrek was something. I think it was more like an Apple computer game. And the problem with NetTrek was that since you didn't have the problems that the mainframe had, it didn't port over some of the flaws that are in the game. So there are some flaws that have to do with just how the original system worked that actually are part of the strategy and tactics of the game. If you don't, they call it hypering. If you don't replot, because you have to request a replot or you have to do 10 keystrokes before you get a replot. And you're forced to replot after 10 seconds too. So if you sit for 10 seconds and then key in that you want to go this direction full speed, you just appear where you would be after 10 seconds. And so that's become the tactic in the game, and something that it's one of the really beautiful elements of the game is a bug. And so when we're fighting, there's a tension there of, I know he's over here, but it's not a real-time replot thing. It's more like watching the radar in a World War II naval game or something. But I know that the longer he's sitting there, the greater his range is to just appear somewhere and attack, And it's a fascinating game, actually.
Cool. Yeah.
Hearing that, I harken back to my early gaming where, like I said, I loved watching the folks who did the wargaming. I didn't have the resources or the space to have all the stuff to do that myself, but I used to buy a lot of the books that went along with some of the war games. Not so much the Napoleonics, but I used to buy a lot of the Roman and I can't remember the name of the books, but I used to buy stuff on Roman armies and Greek armies, specifically hoplites and phalanxes and things like that. Because there's, at the time that I was early in my time at my local game shop, they did a lot of that there as well. And I remember I would take tactics that I would read about in those games and just apply them in my D&D games. I'm going to do this tactic, and then I'd force my DMs to adjudicate how successful they would be. And because I was the only one reading all these war game books, I tended to win lots of those big battles. So it was
right. You understood. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it was like, that can't work. I'm like, but unfortunately it did. And in fact, then I'll just read them the battle in which it actually worked.
Right.
And they're like, oh.
It was Alexander versus these guys, and he totally whooped their asses.
Exactly.
It's why our risk games used to be so epic, Lewanika, is because both of us would be approaching the situation with this understanding of tactics that, because it's something that we shared, is that we both had studied. I'm a huge medieval geek, and so studying like medieval warfare and like the Strategicon by Maurice and stuff like that. Like these are like books that are on my shelf that I've read. And so it's when we would sit down to play Risk, it was just like, it was even more epic than your average Risk game, because like the strategy that we were putting through and everything like that was just kind of otherworldly. Yeah.
I remember when I was a kid, I wanted to know more. I read the fantasy books. I watched history stuff on PBS, and I was playing the D stuff. And then I wanted to know more, so I started digging into my parents' books. And so I found a copy of Herodotus. And I'm a teenager. History is this huge, expansive thing. And so I'm reading like ancient history, trying to connect it to my little medieval fantasy game. But it was like what you guys are talking about. You just dig around and you find stuff, and you're just like, okay, this is like it. I'll just use this as my reference source. Yeah, and just trying to find. We didn't have so many resources then, and even up into the 80s. You guys probably saw this. Remember that book called Castle? And it was almost like a kid's book, but it outlined how a castle was made and what the different towers and the keep and the town below. I do. Yeah, but it was like, this is like an incredible resource for an RPGer. It wasn't meant for that necessarily, but it was okay.
Yeah, it was such a great resource that towards the end of the life cycle of second edition, they put out a product called Castle, and then they put out a product called Town, and it was basically RPG rules applied to the same information that was in that book and its subsequent titles. And even later in the cycle, when second edition started their splat book phase, they started putting that out. So there was the castles, there was empires, there was Vikings. I think I think a lot the through line is to those splat books, and that continued through third edition, has fallen out and not in favor in fifth edition, except for the third party market. I think a lot of third party companies, big, small, indifferent, ourselves included, lean into those elements to say, hey, if you want to add this bit of realism to your game,
right,
here's a vehicle to do that. Here's a supplement that will let you add this element of realism. I don't think any one game benefits from all of those things being added, But if you're playing a game that deals with political intrigue and the inner workings of a castle and the structures of upstairs, downstairs, there are a couple products out there, at least 2 or 3 of them by our company ourselves, that would fit really nicely in that venue.
Yeah,
and I think
that
that's
sounds
kind of that
cool,
kind
actually.
of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, there was early on. There was Judges Guild was doing really cool stuff for original Dungeons and Dragons. They did the first actual like city environment and called the City State of the Invincible Overlord, and that was just a stunning thing to see as a kid. Like huge city maps with descriptions of all the little stores. They weren't really big descriptions, but it was an incredible reference, like what you're talking about. It's like suddenly okay, we can go hang out in the city and explore the city and go do things there. Okay.
So my next question, it's going to have to do with something you were talking to us about at the beginning, because I love that y'all are branching out and starting your own convention. And I got to say, I love the name Arnicon, because it has to be named in honor of Dave Arniston with Arnicon.
Yeah.
And that just seems like the fitting cherry on top of the sundae that is this new piece of history that I never knew about before. And since I have the mobile ability, maybe one day I'll make it out towards that area. Give us a little bit more information about Arnicon and what we can expect to see there over and is it a full weekend convention? Is it a single day?
Starts a Friday evening. We wanted to do 2 days, and we had a little conflict with the facility we were working with, and our dates got sold out from under us basically before we could sign a contract. So they offered us a deal to go the next weekend, and we were like, okay, we'll just try it. It's our first one. And so what we did, instead of 2 full days, they offered to let us do a Friday evening, all of Saturday, and Sunday morning and afternoon. And so it's a 2-day, it's just a small convention. And I don't know, it's a weird convention by most standards, because it's not, I think conventions tend to have a format of what they're doing. Ours is pretty loose as far as there's role playing, there's war games. And then I got a hold of the Play-Doh people, and I said, hey, can you guys set up some sort of display or some way people can learn about the Play-Doh system? And so they're going to be coming up and running like a vintage computer games for the whole convention in one of the rooms. Cool. So people will be able to go and try out these like really early and really cool computer games. So it's going to be a little bit of everything. Wesley's going to be there running Brownsteins. Ross Baker will be running Strategos and for Napoleonics. And I suspect the miniatures that he's using might be from Dave Arnison's collection, because I know Ross has Dave's army now. And what else? Some of the guys that were involved in the group that created Fight in the Skies, also known as Dawn Patrol, they're going to be there to run Dawn Patrol. I'm going to be running, what is the game called? Fletcher Pratt Naval Combat. It's a game from, I think it was invented around 1937 maybe. And it's a World War I, World War II surface naval combat game. It's really cool. It's where people claim that's where hit points come from, is that game. What else? Dan Boggs is going to be running Tonnisborg. David McGarry, of course, will be there running the Dungeon board game, which was also came out of Dave Arnison's basement in a way, because he did his first demonstration where he let people play his prototype on Dave Arnison's game table. And he happens to have Dave Arnison's table now. And so he's going to bring Dave Arnison's game table, which is a ping pong table, to the convention. It's really more about the people that are going to be there. Yeah. There's going to be, Malia's going to be there, Dave Arnison's daughter, and a lot of the people like Marty, the wandering elf in Blackmoor, he'll be there. Greg Svensson will be there, the great Svenny. You can just go through the list. We got about, I think, 17 people that are associated with the original group. People you would know about and people you might not know about. John Warren was fly on the wall. He might have been 8 years old when they were playtesting D&D at the Gaylord house. So he was just this kid that would wander in, and the grown-ups were playing this game back before anybody thought it would be worth anything. And he's going to be there, so it'd be cool to see John. I don't know. It's going to be a cool event, and it's going to be small.
Sounds really cool.
Yeah, it's going to be really small. Like any kind of business venture, you have to get out there so that people know you exist, and usually that means that you're not going to make a lot of money or anything. Like, it's not,
Sure.
If we wanted to make money, we wouldn't be doing a game convention, because it's just not, until it's something really huge, it's not really like a viable commodity. It's more, we just wanted to do something cool.
Yeah. When is Arnicon and where is it?
Oh, it's going to be in October 20th through the 22nd. It's in Minneapolis, but we'd like to think of it as a Twin Cities convention, because the gamers represent both cities.
Sure.
Arneson lived over in St. Paul when he invented D&D, or at least his parents did. All the information is on our website at tfott.com, thefellowshipofthething.com. If you go there, there's in the banner, there's a thing that says Arnicon, and you can click that and get more information.
Excellent.
I'm pretty sure Josh actually had forwarded something about Arnicon just either today or yesterday, because I remember sending that on, because I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. Had a picture of, looks like Dave Arneson in a wizard outfit, which I thought was very cool. Obviously, who else could
There's
you
a
have
story
as a
there.
spokesperson? Ooh, and which brings me to my question. Please tell us the story of that picture.
Oh, is that where you were leading up to, really?
This is the magic of radio. Yes, it was.
No, it is now.
Dave Arneson.
I'm just tangented for you.
I'm not sure if Dave Arneson was invited to go over or if he was just taking a trip. I think it was the movie was made in like Czechoslovakia or Poland or something like that. And so Dave ended up over there, and they were all thrilled to meet. Like, we're making a movie called Dungeons and Dragons. It was the original one that was really a bomb. And he was there, and they jokingly said, God, it'd be wonderful if you could be in the movie. You have to be in the Screen Actors Guild. At which point, Dave Arneson pulls out his wallet, pulls his Screen Actors Guild card, because he was a Civil War reenactor. And if you see Dances with Wolves, the chubby dude in the background of the Confederate soldiers is Dave Arneson. Like, he's just in there, like, blurry in the background, but that's Dave Arneson in Dances with Wolves, dressed as a Civil War or post-Civil War soldier, as a Union guy. But so he pulled out his card. He's, oh no, I can be in your movie. I have my Union card right here.
Nice.
And so they were like, okay, this is great. So they, I guess they had a scene where there were these wizards that were casting a spell. And so Dave was one of the wizards casting the spell, and they had a costume for him and everything. And they took that shot. It comes from the film when they were making the film as a promo still. And after they made the movie, they cut the scene with Dave Arneson in it. So he's not even in the movie.
Oh, man.
No.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
So that's why it bombed.
If he was in it now, I bet more people would be interested in seeing it. But you can see him in... He was part of the Minnesota First, which was like a really significant unit in the actual American Civil War. At Gettysburg. They were there. I think they were right there during Pickett's charge and helped annihilate the Confederate charge and hold the line. And so they came from a place that's in Minneapolis. Fort Snelling was their fort. And so he was part of the group that would do like historical reenactments there. They had all the kit and everything. When somebody was doing a movie from that time period, they'd be like, we need Union soldiers. And they'd be like, okay, we'll come down and do the thing.
We got 200 over here.
Yeah. So huge answer.
That's
cool.
Awesome. I love that story.
No, that is a great story.
It is a great picture. We're definitely going to have to use that for the photo for this episode. It's the picture that's on your Twitter profile, and it's fantastic. Yeah. It's just like Dave being happy. There's the big old smile on his face in a total kind of goofy wizard outfit. It's amazing. It's an amazing picture.
Yeah, you guys were asking about interviews earlier, like indicative, like things that insights from stuff that didn't end up in the movie. And Dave had an assistant teacher when he was down at Full Sail in Florida teaching gaming. Imagine that, having Dave Arneson for your computer gaming.
Oh, I know. That was amazing. Right? That video of him at the end was amazing. Yeah. Anyway, so go ahead. Yeah.
And his assistant talked about Dave was like the gamer's gamer. He would it was like, oh, there's a convention. I got to go to the convention. And his assistant would be like, Dave, like, you're old. And like, how are you going to get there? Like, you don't take good care of yourself. What are you going to eat? Who's going to keep an eye on you? And he'd be like, oh, I'll be fine. I got to go play war games. And it really gave you an idea of what kind of a character he was. Like, I think that I get the feeling that you guys have the sense I get just seeing the footage when you see the interviews that these are like when I met the Blackmoor bunch, I was just like, oh, these are my people. These are gamers, right?
That, yeah.
Like they all come across, oh, I want to go to that guy's basement and push some lead around. Go ahead.
To a person among your primary interviewees, I can say I have sat down and gamed with people just like that and been richer and better for that experience. I would hope that anybody watching that would say, hey, there's that element of that person that reminds me of something that Lewanika did, or that Josh did, or that Glen did. I would hope that they see that gaming DNA that metaphysically has traveled through the dice, through all of us. When I see that film, that's exactly the thought I had when we're watching it and the film is ending, the credits are rolling, Dave Arneson is talking about gaming and he's up there teaching. And I remember saying that these are my people. This is his legacy. To riff off of something that Glenn says all the time, D&D is ours, or D&D is my game too. I own it more than Wizards does, or some other company does, or some other person does. This has been what we've been doing for our lives for as long as we've been largely
since I was 8.
Since we've been making real choices. We've been rolling dice and making choices at a game table. It's our game. It's our legacy. And I love the fact that at its core and at the very beginning, when it was just starting, that's exactly how the Blackmoor group feels about the game. It's their game. It's their rules. It's their legacy. They did the thing that they wanted to do. They made choices. We make choices, and whether we change rules or whatever, I think it might have been Wesley who said something along the lines of, that doesn't work, we just did a different thing, or some similar statement to that, and that seemed to ring very true for all of them.
They were inventing the rules back then. When they took a game they were playing and they changed it up, everything they did was inventing rules, so they had to keep some form of a flexibility going on in terms of how things were going to be adjudicated, which is, of course, why the movie focuses on it too, why the referee becomes so important.
Wow. Yeah, cool. All right, Griff, really appreciate you taking some time tonight to come out and talk about the Secrets of Blackmoor. I know that, so you talked about this kind of earlier ahead of time, and none of us had even heard of it yet, but you're working on, or have a book out also, of rule supplement, so what's going on with that?
We started, when we were doing the movie, we discovered this old dungeon, and it had been lost for like 35 years. And we happened to put the pieces together as to what these mysterious maps were, and we figured out that it was this dungeon that had come to be known as the Lost Dungeon of well, it was known as Tonnisborg, and it was considered to be lost. And so when we discovered that, we wrote a book on it called The Lost Dungeons of Tonnisborg. Nice. And so we have Tonnisborg. During the making of the movie, we discovered that there were all these other games that were not published that, for whatever reason, part of the schism between Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, which is really a lot. People talk about that because Dave Arneson had the biggest stake in the company as far as royalties, but there were other designers that had designed games. Like there was a sci-fi game that started in 1973, and we've rediscovered, or John Snyder gave us the fragments he had. Most of it was destroyed in a flood. And then it turned out David McGarry had a printout of a draft that was at Dave Arneson's Adventure Games when the company went out of business, and he just snagged it because he thought it needed to be preserved. He's just had it in his basement all this time. So we have a sci-fi game that predates Traveller. David McGarry, being so closely tied to it and like really loving the game, is taking the lead on like the design, or not really the design, but polishing up what there is there. And it's funny because TSR put out Star Frontiers. I know there are a lot of people that are big fans of the game, but I don't think it even has like a space system, whereas Snyder's game had space exploration and spaceship building like Traveller does already in it. And what it was, long answers. Snyder had published two installments of his game. The first was called Star Probe. The second one was called Star Empire, and the third one was going to be Star Master. And that would be, it was like the exploration game where you encounter alien races and start to create an empire. The empire part where you're doing economics and, I don't know, like Civilization, like that game.
Building it out.
Yeah.
Risk, Civilization. And then the individual going on adventures and exploring RPG game would have been the Star Master game. So we're going to republish all three as one big volume, like hardbound, the same as Tonisporg. There's a slew of games that we found, like Dave Arneson wrote a gangster game. And so we have a couple different versions of it because we have all the different playtest editions of it. We even have some playtest notes. And so we'd like to publish that one.
Found a gold mine of stuff in there.
I was just going to say, that's the follow-up question is, do these guys know what they have in their basements, and when can we go to witness and look through them?
But it's sad. People don't realize the value of these things. Like when Pete Gaylord passed away, this is a tragic story. His daughters wanted to help, so they cleared out his desk and threw everything in the trash.
No.
And luckily, for some of it anyway, a collector came by their house and he looked at their trash can, and sitting right on top was a #1 issue of the Dragon magazine. And he picked that up and he brought it in and he said, "This is worth about $300. You might not want to throw it away." Unfortunately, he wasn't a historian like myself. I would have been going through the ephemera and looking for the scraps of paper with weird stuff that other people might not recognize. And I'd be like, oh my God, I've heard of this. They've talked about it. I've never seen evidence of it. And here's the evidence, right?
Yeah. Manuscript notes.
With Thaco or whatever.
Somebody's early character sheet, something like that.
Yeah.
These are the things that must be preserved by the Soul Society.
Absolutely. Shameless plug for our current Kickstarter. I have something that I've been doing forever, which is I save every character sheet for every character I've ever made.
That's great. Yeah.
And as the different editions of D&D have happened, I've updated those character sheets for each version.
Oh, wow.
Which is just something I've done. And part of it is because...
Can I just tell you that you're a big nerd?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Loud and proud. Loud
and proud. Really, to my core. But no, so those are the kinds of things I have notes from some of the early games I ran, like scrap pieces of notes from when I ran Redbox are still with some of my old games. I have computers that are in my game closet that I am still trying to get information off of because they have some of my original notes for game sessions or old campaigns that I've written. And this is basically my way of putting on record when my time comes, my family should not throw anything away. They should make sure that Josh gets it all so that he can go through and get the goodies, make sure they go to good use. But I love the fact that, it was not saved because they thought it was worth money. Even though it's scary that because they didn't know it was worth money, it might have been thrown away. But the fact that it was more like this, when you interview Malia, I just get the feeling like this is my dad. Like there's just a love for the things that her dad was, and who he was that comes through in your interviews for her that I think is just awesome. Those are the kinds of conversations that we've been talking about for years that we formed this podcast because, quite honestly, we wanted to get it down. And I think that's what you've done with this movie is you've gotten it down. You've preserved
as much as we could.
You've preserved that light, that energy, that love of this game, of each other, of people and interaction that would have been lost to the ages if it were just up to somebody saying, oh, yeah, this name wrote this book on this date and it sold for X amount of copies. Story.
But one of the tragedies, I think, is that there are no interviews with Dave Arneson where somebody would have been as incisive and critical as I am in an interview, where you burrow down and ask the real questions. Every interview I saw of Dave Arneson, there were just surface questions. And to me, that's really disappointing because it's like you got the guy that invented the thing and you're not asking him specific questions. And he never got into specifics. So we don't even really know what his rules were when he started. We don't really know very much about what he was doing. And then the other tragedy is some of the guys that were in the group passed away, like Dan Nicholson, a year before we started the movie. Some of the guys in the movie are actually have cognitive issues because of their age. And so they couldn't remember a lot of the things. And Dwayne Jenkins had suffered a stroke. And so his memory of things wasn't as clear as it could have been. And it's Dwayne Jenkins is the guy that does the cowboy and western game, right?
Yeah.
And I'd ask him stuff and he'd be like, I just don't remember. It's gone. Like I lost it in my stroke. It's just gone. And so there's no way, like there's
It
John
must have been hard
Peterson.
for him.
Yeah. And it was also hard for him when he would try to remember things that were missing. I could tell that he was really straining. Like it was really almost painful in a weird way. Mm. And John Peterson, fortunately, let us use some stuff from his archive that covered that game. So we had a better idea of what was going on, or there was stuff we could put on the screen to show what the cowboy game was like. Yeah. Cowboy and Western, Brownstone, Texas.
It's a tragedy when these kinds of stories are lost to time. I think historians, chroniclers, bards, to go to our own products, the Soul Society, Commonwealth Records, all of these great organizations that we played at game tables and we do in real life are all about capturing that spark before it's gone from our grasp or our view.
So you did just a brilliant job with 200 hours of footage. Like that's a Herculean feat, Griff. That's incredible.
Absolutely.
So, but
60 hours, it's still a ton. I don't know how much is there. I just guess at 200.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. It was just hard to do. I'm glad that people find it engaging. There are places where I felt like a lot of people have criticized it for being too long, and there are places where they felt like it should only be 90 minutes. But I felt like it was important to be truthful to the story, and I felt that the story needed that much time.
Yeah, it kind of felt like two movies, right? It had the beginning where it was a lot of background, a lot of history, a lot of kind of the earliest, like when you're talking about like the Napoleonics and everything like that. And then it gets into the way that things evolved into specifically role playing. And I thought that was a really neat way to divide it so that it didn't feel long because both of those parts were so incredibly important and giving them the right amount of space was important. So I thought that was a really neat way to break that up. I don't know if that was intentional or if that was just like how I saw it, but
there are a lot of different threads. There's the thread of them inventing the game, right? So you can follow these different games. Then there's also the thread of the different stages of who's involved with the group and because I think that the big impact on what was going on was that there was a schism in the group when Leslie disappears to go off to get his master's degree. And so that's in 67. And then in 69, they meet Gary Gygax. And that same year, there are these high school kids. Arneson is already 69. He would have been 22. Yeah. And the other thread is that you've got these kids coming in that are high school kids. And Arneson is, because they're younger, they're not treating him like a jerk, basically. And they are respectful toward him as their referee, and he's in charge of the table. And that's something even with D&D. I see a lack of respect for DMs these days. And people always get on me because they're like, oh, you're just you're an old grognard. You're just criticizing modern games. But there is a trust issue with DMs that has to be there. And it was more there with earlier systems because the rules weren't as precise, like with OD&D and AD&D. And so the same thing is going on with their games. Everybody at the table needs to have faith in the fact that their referee is going to give them a decision sometimes based just on what the referee is just going to decide. This is the reasonable result. And some of you are going to get screwed by that result. And you've got to just, you got to just respect the dungeon master. And that's something that I think is important in all of these games is if you don't trust your dungeon master to give you a fair ruling, it may not be the ruling you want. You're going to get a fair ruling, then you got a problem.
To some extent, if you don't, it's hard if you've never met a person before, you learn that at the table. But if you are going to a table where you've gamed with somebody before and you know before you sit down or before you stand at that game table that I don't like this person, I don't like the way they do things or whatever, then why are you even there?
Right.
That's not the table for you. Doesn't mean that's a bad table. Just means that's not the table for you.
Yeah.
At some point you just have to make that decision. And I'm not one to say, I believe the game needs to be inclusive. I believe there's a whole host of reasons that are just not acceptable for anybody to do at a table. But generally speaking, if you take out the absolutes, like you can't be a racist, you can't be a whatever. If you take those absolutes away, like that's not the problem. If the problem is your styles don't mesh, then just don't play at that table. I can respect, there are a lot of dungeon masters or a lot of storytellers and game masters of various games that I like or respect as people, that I just don't like that style of game, so I don't game at that table.
Right.
And I think if people are a little more conscious about those decisions, we hear a lot less about the problems with DMs, and you don't get groups about, oh, how my DM was evil to me, or my players were jerks to me, vice versa, because there's arguments on both sides. But I think most of those things are simply solved by two people making a decision of who should be at their table better.
Yes, that's the other thing. Finding a good table for you. There's no such thing as like the right table. Everybody's going to be looking for a different game.
Just got to find where you fit.
It's like sliding into the right table is always going to be, it takes time. But like you guys met when you were pretty young.
I was not quite 21 when Lewanika and I met. Yeah.
Yeah. So you guys have all this history together, and I don't know, you have all this outside of gaming history that you know about each other. And
absolutely.
And you can look over at the other one and just by the expression be like, oh, I guess he's not having a good day, or, oh, he's up to something.
Enough blackmail to go around. Exactly.
Yep. I've known Josh for going on 30 some odd years at this point, or 20 some odd, getting closer to 30 every day. I've known Glen since we were in 7th grade. Yeah, we've been around the horn a few.
Our game group, like I met Chris. That's another story, but like one of the guys, Paul. I know Paul through just being a street chess player. We would run into each other on the street playing chess games downtown.
Nice.
And so I've known him since probably, it'd have to be like mid-90s, 94, 95. And then I actually am still friends with some of my original gaming buddies from 77, 2 of them. And I don't know. That's one of the things also that I liked about the movie, was that you're seeing these people that have known each other for a long time. And I don't know if I left the clip in, but there was a clip, maybe it's in the movie, where Gail Gaylord says, you get to know each other, or you become friends, and then you stay that way for the rest of your lives. I don't know if it's in the movie or if it was one of the clips I was saving for another time, but Gail always had these like insightful things that weren't necessarily about gaming, but they were about the things that come out of gaming, which is like these amazing friendships. And
beautiful.
Yeah, I think so.
Absolutely.
Wow. What a great conversation.
Unfortunately, our time is up for the evening. It's been awesome having you on here. Just one more quick shout out for Secrets of Blackmoor. It's available on Amazon Prime and on Vimeo. You pick the streaming service of your choice, depending on your locality. Griff, thanks so very much for joining us tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on here. Yeah,
thanks a lot. Really nice meeting you guys.
Absolutely.
This has been a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, the conversation, even more, as enlightening as the film, the two together is like the perfect package. So I really hope that folks who've heard our voices in this episode go see the movie so they get that whole package and really put that together.
It was really great. Yeah, so go check out Secrets of Blackmoor. It's fantastic. And then let's see, next week on the podcast, we have the team from Coaches and Dragons coming on next week. A follow on to the episode that we did with Jonathan Mendoza way back at the beginning of the year, talking about how tabletop role-playing games are being used in a personal development kind of way. It's an entire company focused on using that as their model. It's a really interesting folks that I met over on LinkedIn, so really excited to have them on the show next week. Griff, thanks again for joining us. And everybody out there listening, thanks for taking time to listen to the episode. Go check out Secrets of Blackmoor, and we'll talk to you next week. Thanks so much, everybody.
Have a great night.
Thank you for joining us. This has been Tabletop Journeys. We would love to hear your feedback on our show today. Join us at www.ttjourneys.com, where you can subscribe to the blog to leave comments and see all the content that we publish beyond the podcast.
You can also stay in touch by subscribing to our Twitter, Tumblr, or Instagram at TT Journeys, joining our Facebook group, Tabletop Journeys, or by sending an email directly to podcast@ttjourneys.com. Our full episodes come out every week on Friday, and every Tuesday features actual play and gameplay showcase episodes. Looking for early access? You can support the show and get episodes before everyone else at www.patreon.com/TT Journeys. Check it out today and see all the awesome benefits we bring to our supporters.
Lastly, if you're listening to us on Stitcher, iTunes, Podchaser, Spotify, or Audible, we would really appreciate it if you would like and subscribe to the podcast on that platform. Thank you for listening and for being a part of our growing community. And we bid you fair tides, friends, for legends await.
Here's a preview of the Traveler's Guide to Factions.
Commonwealth Records started out collecting and preserving the folk art and the folk music of the world around them. So Commonwealth Records is a faction of bards and scholars and historians that are dedicated to exploring every culture they can come across.
The Soul Society. This is a group that represents seekers of untold lore. This faction is a bunch of academics. They're sleuths. They're amateur adventurers, archaeologists of sorts.
The Ember Weavers are that mix between super technological group and super magic. They are very much a group that represents the merging of those two things with a kind of industrial twist.
The Hands of Providence are a conclave of Aasimar prophets, soothsayers, and other fortune tellers and seers that all share a common vision for the future.
This is the Thunder Swarm. They're not an organized military. They're not technically religious zealots because they're there to help. But when good people are in need of help, the God of Tempest has a way of bringing in the storm that's going to wash evil clear.
The Order of the Ivory Compass is a quasi-military organization of buccaneers and privateers and basically merchant marines. They started as a group that was meant to protect shipments, definitely a group that has maybe forgotten its roots on some level.
The Guardians of the Grave are a cadre of viciously dedicated undead hunters that seek out and destroy any kind of undead that exists. The line between life and death should never be broken, and they kill all undead.
This is the Outriders League, a league of professional soldiers that are specifically involved in scouting, pathfinding, trailblazing, and espionage.
The Wharfman Left is a multiverse spanning organization of spies and fixers run by an incredibly ancient hag. It could be any form of Baba Yaga type deal maker, Ursula from The Little Mermaid, just to go in another direction.